Processes. We've been talking about individuals up to this point. Now we're going to talk about how groups function and how they dysfunction. One of the things you need to think about is that you have a paper that's due the 1st of April. As I have told people from time to time, I do not count off for late work. Just get it in before the end of the semester. And I will be happy the closer to the end that you turn it in, probably the less happy I will be because I'll have a lot of papers to read right there at the end. And I spend a lot of time reading. I deep read uh, every paper. It needs to be 5 pages of text. That's text. So if you put an introductory page and a bibliography at the beginning and a bibliography at the end, that's 7 pages. It's got to be 5 pages of text, otherwise I'm going to count off. I want 5 pages of text. No AI, don't use ChatGPT. If you use ChatGPT, it's really hard to prove what's ChatGPT and what's not. I've already talked about that I talked about that in most of my classes, but the reason I don't want you to use ChatGPT is because ChatGPT does all the thinking and you do none of it. And of course, I'm trying to make you think. One of the problems we're going to have in the future is not only are we going to be so lazy that we're not going to move, but we're also going to be so lazy we're not going to think. We're going to let artificial intelligence do all of our thinking for us, and that will mean the human race will no longer be functional. Um, there's a movie like that. Anyway. So let's go ahead and get started on group processes. Why not? A group is two or more people who interact with and influence one another, and in so doing consider themselves as a group. The human brain is adapted to maintain cohesion in groups up to about 150 people. Most groups contain less than 4 people, but that's 100, and that turns out to be 150 people, I think. Anyway, they've done studies, and what they've determined is that 150 is about right. So if you think of all the people that you know, all the people you went to school with that you still interact with, and you start counting up family members and whatnot, it's about 150. Groups normally last for an extended length of time, but as in the case of fans at an athletic event, it may only be for a few moments. Social psychologists feel that groups exist because people need to feel a sense of belonging in many of the things that they do. And this is known as affiliation. These guys are members of the White Aryan Nation, unfortunate group. But affiliation just means that you feel like you need to be part of something. Once a group is formed, what forces hold it together? And one of them is group cohesiveness, the strength of the relationship that linked members of the group. This is according to Forsyth in 1990. It's essentially what keeps people in the group. Cohesiveness is influenced by several factors. Group members' mutual attraction. Groups may be cohesive because the members find one another attractive or friendly. Whatever causes people to like one another increases group cohesiveness. Members' propinquity, physical closeness, as when they live or work near each other. Sometimes simply being around people regularly is enough to make people feel that they belong to a group. Their adherence to group norms. When members live up to group norms without resistance, the group is more cohesive than when one or two members deviate a lot or when many members deviate a little. The group's success at moving toward its goals. Groups that succeed in reaching their goals are obviously more satisfying for their members and therefore more cohesive than those that fail. If groups do not achieve what the members wish for the group, they cease to exist or at the very least are reorganized. Members' identification with the group, group loyalty. The success of a group will often depend on the degree of loyalty its members have to that group. Groups help us meet a variety of biological and psychological social needs. Couched in terms of natural selection, evolution would favor those who preferred groups to those who preferred to live in isolation. Humans hunting in groups were more successful in bringing down big game than individual hunters. Groups meet psychological needs. Our first experiences occur within the context of the family group. Some people believe that our adult reactions to groups stem from our feelings about our family. We react toward group members with much the same feelings we have toward our fathers or mothers. Groups satisfy a variety of social needs, such as social support, the comfort and advice of others, and protection from loneliness. Groups make it easier for people to deal with anxiety and stress. Human beings are social beings. We don't do very well when we are isolated. Research shows that social isolation, the absence of meaningful social contact, is strongly associated with death. Groups satisfy the human need for social comparison. We compare our feelings, opinions, and behaviors with those of other people, particularly when we are unsure about how to act or think. We compare ourselves to others who are similar to us to get accurate information about what to do. The group often has different expectations for different group members. Newcomers are expected to obey the group's rules and standards of behavior, its norms, and show that they are committed to being good members. More senior members have idiosyncratic credit and can occasionally stray from the group norms. For new members, the best chance of being accepted by a group is to behave in a passive and anxious way. When the new members balks at following group norms or they don't meet the group's expectations, the group may try to take some corrective action by putting pressure on the member to conform. If the deviant, and I really don't like that word, but it's the word that they used in the book, if the deviant does not come around, the group then disowns them. The deviant usually bows to group pressure and conforms to group norms. Deviants are rejected most when they interfere with the functioning of the group. And of course, this is Bjork. This is a picture of Bjork in her famous swan outfit. As you can see, nobody else had on anything that looked anywhere close to that. You probably don't remember Bjork. She was a singer in the end of the 20th century, beginning of the 21st century. She's probably still around. It's just that she hasn't done anything that I've heard of lately, which doesn't mean that she hasn't done anything that you guys haven't heard. One of the oldest concepts of social psychology is that people perform better and faster when in the presence of other people, and this is known as social facilitation. The concept of social facilitation not only includes athletic events, but also is present in all species and most activities, including sexual activities among breeding pairs of rats. Yuck. According to work by Robert Zients, the anxiety caused by the presence of others inhibits complex tasks but facilitates simple tasks. However, social facilitation does not always take place. In fact, with more complex activities, the presence of others actually tends to hinder performance. Athletes tend to be more energized when they are given support. For this reason, home field advantage is very important since the athletes are more likely to be supported in their own territory. This is no truer in any sport than soccer, where almost 70% of games are won by the home team. While individuals tend to gain comfort from being around other people, too many people tend to have the opposite effects. When people are crammed in shoulder to shoulder, they tend to have the same reactions. Close together, people tend to have higher pulse rates and blood pressure. My wife and I went to an opera in, where were we? Bozeman. We were in Bozeman, and it was at a junior high school. And we were up in the balcony, and I'll tell you what, They put those seats together so closely that it was just not really very comfortable. Because junior high students, it turns out, don't have shoulders like adult people do. Anyway, it was fairly uncomfortable. Can't remember what we saw. Tosca, that's what we saw. Nicholas Cottrell feels that the reason individuals perform differently when people are watching is because the individual is concerned about how others are evaluating them. Researchers have discovered people perform better when their co-actor is slightly superior. Arousal decreases when a high-status group is diluted with people the performer doesn't care about. People who worry about evaluations are the ones most affected by their presence. Social pressure is the most intense when people are unfamiliar and hard to keep an eye on. Researchers have found that when a performer is distracted, they're more aroused, whether the distraction is human or not. Robert Zients has shown that people react to the presence of another person, whether they're evaluating or not. Joggers are energized when running with someone else, no matter how good they are. And of course, I told you the story. I think I told you the story of this was when I was in Japan. I'd run a 3-mile loop, and I picked up a guy about a mile and a half into the run, and he was running ahead of me. And next thing I know, I've caught him, and we kind of ran together for about a mile, I guess. And so then he veered off to the gym, and I veered off to my house. And when I got back, I looked at my watch. I had gone like 15 seconds faster than I'd ever run the 3-mile loop before. Another explanation of presence of others effect is the distraction conflict theory. According to this theory, arousal results from a conflict between demands for attention from the task and demands for attention from the audience. And that's distraction, as you can imagine, trying to work on your computer with all those people. There are 3 main points to the distraction conflict theory. First, the presence of other people distracts attention from the task. Second, distraction leads to conflicts in attention. An individual has just so much attentional capacity. And third, the conflict between these 2 claims for attention stresses the performer and raises the arousal level. And this, of course, if you've ever been to or participated in an athletic event, sometimes the crowd can bother you, and this is known as having rabbit ears, of course, because you're listening to what people are saying to you or how they're harassing you. That's known as having rabbit ears, distraction theory. Researchers have discovered that when people are working on a group project, people tend to exert less effort toward a common goal than if people are being held accountable individually. And this is known as social loafing. John Sweeney refers to people benefiting from social loafing as free riders, individuals who benefit from the group but give little effort in return. One of the downfalls of communism was the prevalence of social loafing. We're talking about communism in the Soviet Union and in Eastern Europe. With no impetus to stick out and no incentive to improve, production in communist countries stagnated. While in private production of agriculture, the people outstripped themselves and their neighbors when allowed to grow their own food on less land. People will still watch public television, though they refuse to contribute money to it. Social loafing. On the challenging tasks when an individual perceives their portion of the work is indispensable, they work harder. They also work harder when they consider the individuals in their group as unreliable. An individual will work harder when their performance will bring select rewards, such as stock options. People tend to loaf less when the other members of their group are considered friends rather than strangers. People in collectivist cultures social loaf less than people in individualistic cultures. Women who tend to be less individualistic than men social loaf less than men do. People are more likely to work hard when there are challenging objectives. They are rewarded for group success. There is a spirit of commitment to the team. The Curlier effect is seen when a less capable member of a two-person group, a dyad, working together on a task works harder and performs better than expected when the group product is to be a result of the combined conjunctive effort of the two members. This seems to be the opposite of social loafing. The weaker member of the group, rather than free riding or loafing, in fact increases his or her effort. And I was on a relay team when I was in college. The other three members, this was a sprint relay team. It was what you guys call the 400-meter relay. This was a 440 relay. This is back before we changed to meters. Anyway, so everybody ran 110 yards, and the other three members of the relay team were sprinters, and I was a quarter miler, but I was pretty quick. That's how I got to be the fourth member, and we continually broke the record. And my times were very similar to two of the other members. We had one guy that was really, he still holds the record. Actually, that record still stands. 55 years later, we still hold the record. And that was a record held by three sprinters and a middle distance runner. So, Curlier effect. Groups not only affect how we perform, but they also influence our individual sense of worth, our self-esteem, which in turn has an impact on how one group relates to other groups in a society. In 1971, Tajfel and his colleagues showed that group categorizations along with in-group identification are both necessary and sufficient conditions for groups to discriminate against other groups. Individuals obtain part of their self-concept, their social identity, from their group memberships and seek to nourish a positive social group identity to heighten their own self-esteem. Groups who are successful and are held in high esteem by society enhance the esteem of their members. The opposite is also true. If you're a member of a group that is held in low self-esteem, then that's the same situation. Group success depends on the social comparison with relevant outgroups on issues that are important to both. Favorable comparisons enhance the group and its members. Social identity, then, is a definition of the self in terms of group membership. Changes in the fate of the group imply changes in self-concept of the individual members. Self-identity theory proposes that a number of factors predict one group's reaction to other competing groups in society. It pertains to what may arise from identification with a social category, membership in a social, political, racial, religious group, etc. It assumes that the potential that one group will tend to discriminate or downgrade another group will be affected by four factors: how strongly the in-group members identify with their group, the importance of social category that the in-group represents, the dimension on which the groups are competing. The more important the dimension, the greater the potential for conflict. The group's relative status and the difference in status between the in-group and the out-group. A member who threatens the success of a group also threatens the positive image of the group. This leads to the black sheep effect. The observation that whereas an attractive in-group member is rated more highly than an attractive member of an out-group, an unattractive in-group member is perceived more negatively than an unattractive out-group member. The social identity theory inference is that the unattractive in-group member is a serious threat to the in-group's image, and this is known as the black sheep effect. There is little in life as frightful as being excluded from groups that are important to us. Such treatment is called social ostracism and is defined as the act of excluding or ignoring other individuals or groups. Organizations, employers, co-workers, friends, and family all may ignore or disengage from people, the silent treatment, to punish, control, and vent anger. The pervasiveness of ostracism shows that 67% of the sample surveyed said they had used the silent treatment, deliberately not speaking to a person in their presence. on a loved one, and 75% indicated that they had been a target of the silent treatment by a loved one. As you might imagine, the silent treatment is a marker of a relationship that is disintegrating. And of course, I think I've told you this story. Well, maybe not. Anyway, when I was in college, I was a 17-year-old, started college, went to a fairly elite school in Indiana. And when I got there, they told me that I had to learn the school song. Well, there were other things that were going on. They were indoctrinating us. They made us wear a special hat to show that we were freshmen. And they didn't just make us wear that hat, but they chased us around and tried to take the hat away from us and tear it apart. And of course, we were supposed to keep them from doing that. The other thing we were supposed to do is learn the school song. And we didn't like all this indoctrination. Some of us didn't like the indoctrination. The people in the fraternities didn't mind, but some of the independents didn't like participating in all this silliness. So what happened was when they were what they did, they lined us all up, and there were like 280 of us. They lined us all up in front of the chapel, and we had to sing the school song. And while we were singing the school song, people were walking around and harassing people and yelling in their ears and doing things to them, holding dead animals in front of their faces. I mean, really stupid stuff. This is part of indoctrination. And we decided we weren't going to put up with it. So instead of singing the school song, and when the whole thing started, we went into the chapel. Well, I got a group of guys decided they weren't going to let me go inside. I was going to go into the chapel and write the school song. So a group of guys decided they weren't going to let me go inside, and they started messing, throwing me back and forth. I'm not a very big person. At the time, I only weighed probably 145, 150 pounds. I'm only 5'6". Finally, the dean of students came and he escorted me inside, and I started writing the thing down. And I made too many mistakes. I made 5 mistakes. It's this huge thing. It's 2 stanzas that are really, really long, and it's all poetry. And I made 5 mistakes. So the punishment for making as many mistakes as I did was that they were going to shave my head in the shape of a W. They're going to shave off all the hair on my head except for that W on the top of my head. Well, I was dating somebody at the time, and I knew that having my head shaved in the shape of a W, or even having no hair at all if I shaved off the W, later on, that really wouldn't be a good idea. So when it came to me, I said, "No, you're not going to do that. You're not going to do that." I wouldn't let them do that. So they got mad, and they decided that what they would do was to socially ostracize all the people that refused to get their heads shaved in the shape of a W. There were 6 of us, and there were 6 of us, and one guy got his head shaved. The other 5 of us refused. Well, 3 of those people were African Americans, and then there were 2 people that were white, and things kind of went that strange direction for the rest of the semester. And you wonder why I stayed there. And sometimes I wonder why I stayed. I know why I stayed. I stayed because I was running cross country at the time, so I had some social support. The sad part was that the black guys didn't have any place to go. If you were white, you could go to the fraternities or whatever. Of course, we were independent, so we weren't allowed to go anywhere. But the social ostracism, they wouldn't let us do things on campus. All we could do was eat, go to sleep in the dorm, and go to class. That's it. That's all we were supposed to do. Of course, and there were other things that were going on campus, but were theoretically not allowed to attend any of these things. It was really quite hurtful, as you can imagine. Anyway, I survived, and the reason I survived was probably because I ran cross country, and then I ran track in the spring, and after I ran my first season in track, we broke a couple records and whatnot. And after that, it was nobody really paid attention to the social ostracism, but it was pretty tough. It was so tough that the African Americans created their own fraternity or created their own place to go because they had no place to go. And that was the Malcolm X Institute is what happened. So they started the Malcolm X Institute to support the three guys that didn't have any place to go, and I thought that was a good idea. Anyway, so that's my story of social ostracism. Um, there are aspects of it. I was this track standout, but they weren't allowed to put my picture in the school newspaper. We came out every Friday, but no matter what I did, no matter how well I ran, they had everybody else's picture in there, but they never had my picture in the school newspaper. And the school yearbook didn't have my picture in it very frequently. I mean, they couldn't keep me out of the team photos, but the other thing that happened was really kind of strange. They had at the end of the season, they would always have a banquet, and because of me, they couldn't hold the banquet on campus. Otherwise, I couldn't go if it was theoretically. This is the administration, so they had to hold the banquet off campus, which cost a lot more money, strangely enough. So, okay, so there you go. That's social ostracism. I survived, and I graduated from that institution. And like I said, I still hold a record there. But I've held this record for 55 years, but the interesting thing is that they have a athletic hall of fame, but I'm not a member. I can't be a member, as weird as that is. So, so there you go. Even I'm in the Hall of Fame of my high school, where I also hold a record, but I broke the state record and the school record at Wabash, and still not a member of the Hall of Fame. Punitive ostracism and defensive ostracism are two types of ostracism. Punitive ostracism refers to behaviors, ignoring or shunning, that are perceived by the victim as intended to be deliberate and harmful, and that's what they were supposed to do that. And the coach could have kicked me off the team because of what happened, but he didn't. He was a good Quaker, and he didn't do that. But I couldn't go to anything where the fraternities were because of the shunning, and I got ignored a lot. But I'm used to being ignored. Defensive ostracism is intended to shield your ego from potential negative responses from others. As you might expect, people react very negatively to being targets of ostracism. Ostracism has been shown to have a causal link to suicidal thoughts, and I can assure you I've never had those suicidal thoughts, despite the fact I was socially ostracized from my institution. So there are two types of ostracism. One is what happens, the way other people react to you, and the other is the way that you react to them. You act like it's not hurting you, it's not bothering you. Ostracism has some psychological costs. Researchers have found that ostracizers have more negative moods and feel more disconnected from others as compared to non-ostracizers. Even when people engage in justified ostracism, ostracizing for a good reason, they experience negative effects on their psychological health. Legate and colleagues argue that ostracizers experience negative moods and lower satisfaction because they feel less in control of their behavior, thwarted need for autonomy, and less connected to others, thwarted need for relatedness. Research into reaction to ostracism discovered that males and females reacted differently. Males displayed social loafing by being less productive when working collectively than when working coactively. Females behave quite differently, depending on whether they had been ostracized or included. When included, they tended to work about as hard collectively as coactively. But when ostracized, they were more productive when working collectively compared to when they worked coactively. And I'll have to admit, I probably ran faster and I trained harder because I was trying to stick it in the eye of the of the individuals who were ostracizing me, and it's kind of hard to root for a team and not root for one of the runners. And if you win a race, it's really hard not to cheer that person. So probably by the end of well, my freshman year was pretty tough. My succeeding years, people probably forgot all about it. Women demonstrated that they were interested in regaining a sense of being a valued member of the group by displaying nonverbal commitment, leaning forward, smiling, whereas males tended to employ face-saving techniques such as combing their hair, looking through their wallets, and manipulating objects, all in the service of being cool and showing that they were unaffected by the ostracism. And of course, being cool is really, really important. We can conclude that ostracism did threaten sense of belonging for both males and females, but ostracized females tried to regain a sense of belonging, whereas males acted to regain self-esteem. Large groups can also lead to some pretty horrendous behavior among people. During World War II, Japanese troops systematically raped and murdered 400,000 Chinese civilians in Nanking over a 2-week period after the surrender of the city, and this was in 1937. People perform in groups what they would not have the social support to do alone because of de-individuation. De-individuation is the loss of self-awareness and evaluation apprehension, occurs in a group situation that fosters responsiveness to group norms, good or bad. A group has the power not only to arouse its members, but also to render them unidentifiable. It is the group's action, not the individual's, and that is known as de-individuation. Brian Mullen in 1986 content analyzed newspaper accounts of 60 lynchings committed in the United States between 1899 and 1946 and discovered an interesting fact. The more people there were in the mob, the greater the savagery and viciousness with which they killed their victims. Robert Watson in 1973 studied 24 cultures and found that warriors who hid their identities before going into battle, for example by using face and body paint, were significantly more likely to kill, torture, or mutilate captive prisoners than warriors who did not hide their identities. And of course, you can see all the helmets that hid people's identity. The robes and hoods of the Ku Klux Klan cloak its members in anonymity. Their violent behavior is consistent with the research on de-individuation. Lynch mobs lynch with impunity. Rioters and faceless mobs loot. Large crowds of people around a suicide jumper will bait and jeer them to jump. People in crowded cities are more likely to loot and vandalize than people in small, less crowded cities. De-individuation does not require face-to-face contact. For example, feeling less inhibited on social media, that's anonymous. Cyberspace provides advantages for the free and open discussion of difficult topics, but the cost seems to be a reduction in common civility. The phenomenon of the internet troll is a modern example of de-individuation, made possible by the feeling of anonymity that often go along with being online. Research shows that groups do outperform individuals on many jobs and tasks. 3 reasons have been proposed for the observed superiority of groups over the average person. First of all, groups do a better job than the average person because they recognize truth, accepting the right answer more quickly. Groups are better able to reject error, reject incorrect or implausible answers. Groups have a better, more efficient memory system than do individuals, which permits them to process information more effectively. Group performance seems to be less than the sum of their parts. Groups may process what have been called transactive memory systems, a shared system for placing events into memory, encoding, storing those memories, and retrieving that information. Directory updating, in which people find out what other people members know, what other group members know. Information allocation, the place where new information is given to the person who knows how to store it. And retrieval coordination, which refers to how information is recovered when needed to solve a particular problem. Bacharach et al. Examined research on transactive memory systems and concluded that groups that cooperate in volatile environments, environments marked by unpredictable, rapid change and uncertainty, are more likely to develop transactive memory systems. Environmental volatility increases the need for integrating and coordinating knowledge from disparate source and amplifies the team's information processing demands. We're talking combat, military combat, we're talking ERs, emergency rooms, we're talking about crisis management. They found that effective leadership was positively related to the development of a transactive memory systems. Effective leaders can help team members understand who knows what on their team. Number 3, the diversity of a team may negatively affect the development of a transactive memory system. It all depends on how well the members get along with each other. Groups will do well only if the most talented member can convince the others that he or she is right, which is not always easy, given that many of us bear a strong resemblance to mules when it comes to admitting that we are wrong. You undoubtedly know what it's like to try to convince a group to follow your idea, to be faced with opposition and disbelief, and then to have to sit there and watch the group make the wrong decision. Hopefully you haven't seen that a lot. Process loss is any aspect of group interaction that inhibits good problem solving in some groups. People don't listen to each other. One person is allowed to dominate the discussion while the others tune out. And this is known as process loss. Process loss can occur for a number of reasons. Groups might not try hard enough to find out who the most competent member is. The most competent member might find it difficult to disagree with everyone else. Communication problems can arise. Groups tend to focus on the information they share and ignore facts known to only some members of the group. Subsequent research has focused on ways to get groups to focus more on unshared information. Group discussions should last long enough to get beyond what everyone already knows. Assign different group members to specific areas of expertise so that they know that they alone are responsible for certain types of information. The great person theory purports that certain key personality traits make a person a good leader regardless of the situation. A critical question is, what is the role of the leader in group decision making? The question of what makes a great leader has intrigued psychologists, historians, and political scientists for some time. And this is a quote by the President John Quincy Adams. If your actions inspire others to dream more, to learn more, to do more, and become more, then you are a leader. Now, the interesting thing about John Quincy Adams, if you look at historians have looked at the presidents of the United States, and they have determined that John Quincy Adams probably had the highest IQ of all the presidents that we've had in the United States. Now, the curious thing is that John Quincy Adams was one of the only Whig presidents. He was also only served for one term, and his father only served for one term. The other interesting thing, and this may not be interesting to you, but it is to me, is that I'm a direct descendant of John Quincy and John Adams. Oh my goodness gracious. Now, one of the curious things about John Quincy Adams, he was defeated by Andrew Jackson, and Andrew Jackson had a fairly tainted history of things he did. He's the one that brought in, paid people off by giving them jobs. I can't think what that's called. What else did Jackson do? Jackson's the one that decided that the Supreme Court had no power and that he was going to remove the 5 civilized tribes from the southeast. So he's the one that moved the Seminole, the Creek, Chickasaw, Choctaw, and Cherokee from the southeast of the United States. With even though the Supreme Court told him not to, he did it anyway. Anyway, so John Quincy Adams, as it turns out, was a better congressman than he was a president, and he fought slavery for the next 40. I guess he lived for another 30 years. So he, in Congress, every day he would bring up slavery and tried to get the Congress to debate slavery. But there was a rule in the House of Representatives that you couldn't use the word slavery, and he did, and he was censured every day. He died on the floor of the Congress after he made one of his impassioned speeches. Fabulous, an interesting fellow, just an interesting fellow, kind of a grumpy old man. And it turns out that he's exactly the same height as I was, and his dad was too. So there you go. Personality and leadership abilities are weakly related. Compared to non-leaders, leaders tend to be slightly more intelligent, extroverted, confident, and charismatic. Surprisingly, few personality characteristics correlate strongly with leadership effectiveness. Despite the fact you could be the most intelligent person in the world, like John Quincy Adams was very intelligent, and strangely enough, he was a poor leader. One of his administration was not a successful administration. Simonton in 1987 and also in 2001 correlated all the factors of effective U.S. presidents and found 3 significant variables. One is that most of them were tall, and of course Abraham Lincoln is still the tallest president. I think he was 6'5" or 6'4.5", something like that. And the shortest was James Madison. He was only 5'1". Coming from a small family, and Lincoln, of course, had 2 sisters, I think, and the number of books published before the election. And of course, there you go. You have to be tall, come from a small family, and write a book. And if we look at President Trump wrote The Art of the Deal. He's written a couple. He wrote a couple books before he became president, but we're not exactly sure if he wrote them or not. I think he had a ghostwriter. There are 2 basic styles of leadership. Transactional leaders are leaders who set clear short-term goals and reward people who meet them. Transactional leaders do a good job of making sure the needs of the organization are met and that things run smoothly. And that's a transactional leader. This is a picture of Joseph McCarthy. And the reason I have Joseph McCarthy in here is because, for one thing, not this book, but the last social psychology book I lectured out of said that Joe McCarthy was a perfect example. McCarthy kind of took over the United States at the beginning of the Korean War in the 1950s through 1954, and he was trying to rout out the communists. And his subcommittee on I can't think of the name of it. Anyway, his subcommittee in Congress called people in from Hollywood. They blackballed people. They were able to literally control the government for the next 4 years, despite the fact that, let's see, Truman was president through 52, and then Eisenhower became president in 52. Eisenhower became president in 52 through 60. And eventually McCarthy lost his power. Transformational leaders are leaders who inspire followers to focus on common long-term goals. It is transformational leaders, however, who think outside the box, identify important long-term goals, and inspire their followers to toil hard to meet these goals. And examples of transformational leaders: Benjamin Franklin, Henry Ford, Bill Gates, Walt Disney, Joan of Arc, and Jesus were transformational leaders. Contingency theory of leadership is the idea that leadership effectiveness depends both on how task-oriented or relationship-oriented the leader is and on the amount of control and influence the leader has over the group. This theory was developed by the industrial organizational psychologist Fred Fiedler. The contingency theory of leadership has been supported in studies of numerous types of leaders, including business managers, college administrators, military commanders, and postmasters. Two basic types: task-oriented leaders, a leader concerned more with getting the job done than with workers' feelings and relationships, and relationship-oriented leader, a leader who is concerned primarily with workers' feelings and relationships. Now, my wife was a colonel in the United States Air Force. She was in the service for 24 years. And what happened was that she would go into hospitals, and she was a relationship-oriented leader, and she would go in and clean up the mess that had been made by task-oriented leaders, put the hospital back together after the task-oriented leader had torn it apart. And she did this for probably the last 15 or 16 years of her career, was putting hospitals back together after somebody messed things up. Task-oriented leaders are most effective in high-control work situations. Leader-subordinate relationships are excellent. The work is structured and well-defined. Low-control work situations, this is a hospital, so there was a lot of personality that was involved, and that's usually what the task-oriented leader had messed up, and usually had to do with the doctors and nurses, the people doing the work. Low control work situations, leader-subordinate relationships are poor. The work needing to be done is not clearly defined, and of course that's pretty much what a hospital is. You never know who's going to come in the door. Relationship-oriented leaders are most effective in moderate control work situations. It happens that they get things done fairly smoothly, but some attention to poor relationships and hurt feelings is needed when a task-oriented leader has alienated his workforce, and of course, that's usually what happened with my wife. It may be difficult for women to achieve leadership positions. Many people see good leaders as having agentic traits: independent, aggressive, assertive, and competent. Women are stereotyped as having communal traits: friendly, unselfish, and expressive. Women are in a double bind as leaders. If they are warm and communal, they are perceived as having low leadership potential. If they are agentic and forceful, they are often perceived negatively for not acting like a woman should. Acting like a woman should. In 2014, only 24 of the CEOs of Fortune 500 companies were women, and the boards of directors of U.S. companies, including, only 17%. Things are not much different elsewhere. That 17% figure is actually among the highest in the world, except for Europe, where Norway has 41% of women on the board of directors. Sweden has 27%. Finland has 27%. The United Kingdom has 21%. And France has 18%. If a woman's style of leadership is stereotypically masculine in that she is autocratic, bossy, and task-oriented, she is evaluated more negatively than men who have the same style. This is especially true if men are doing the evaluating. Another danger that women leaders face: because women are perceived as being more communal, they're often thought to be better at managing crises, particularly ones that involve interpersonal problems such as conflict between high-level managers. That might seem like a good thing, trusting women leaders to solve problems, but it has a downside in which women are more likely to be put in precarious, high-risk positions where it is difficult to succeed. And of course, this happened to my wife over and over and over again. She was always successful, uh, and she was up for head of the corps, and there was a and she didn't get it, and there was a reason for it. She wasn't going up against another male. She was going up against another female. But the other female was more task oriented, and therefore uh, she was seen as a better leader. Michelle Ryan and her colleagues have called being put in crisis management roles, dealing with interpersonal problems, as a glass cliff. Even when women have broken through the glass ceiling into top leadership positions, they're more likely than men to be put in charge of units that are in crisis and in which the risk of failure is high. In 2014, Mary Barra became the first female CEO of a major global automaker, in this case, General Motors. Within months, she had to announce plans for General Motors to recall over 11 million cars due to a defective design components that the company had known about for nearly 10 years. So could Barra become another example of a woman who broke through a glass ceiling only to find herself on a glass cliff? And the answer is no. She is still the CEO of General Motors, and she has survived. Somehow she has survived. Looking at leadership around the world, researchers have discovered that different cultures seek different attributes in their managers. Autonomous leadership, where the workers are independent of superiors and the leader stays distant from the workers, is popular in Europe, but not South and Central American countries. But there was a universal agreement about the value of two leadership qualities: charisma and being team oriented. Questions about cultural differences in leadership are receiving increasing attention because in a global economy, work groups are becoming more diverse, and managers from different cultures have increasingly frequent contact. And of course, this is something we've seen with companies in the United States that are headed by Japanese and Chinese firms. If you've ever watched Bob Loves Abishola on Monday nights, I think, yeah, on Monday nights, you can see the difference between a Nigerian boss and an American boss. Group cohesiveness are the qualities of a group that bind members together and promote liking between members. The more cohesive a group is, the more its members are likely to stay in the group, take part in group activities, and try to recruit new like-minded members. If tasks require close cooperation, cohesiveness helps performance. Cohesiveness can interfere with optimal performance. An example is how Kennedy and his administration dealt with the Bay of Pigs incident. The Bay of Pigs incident was in 1961, right after Kennedy became president. Um, Cuban immigrants, Castro took over Cuba in 1959, kicked out the government that was there, and installed a communist government. So the Cubans that had fled to the United States, who didn't agree with communism or with Castro, decided that they would invade Cuba in 1961, and they landed at the Bay of Pigs. And they were actually given support from the CIA. But it became fairly quickly obvious to everybody, just about everybody, that it was a huge mistake. So why in the world did Kennedy allow it to go on to happen? And that the reason is because he was new to the presidency. Nobody argued with. He decided that they should go ahead. Nobody in his administration argued with him because of group cohesiveness. They were a close-knit group, and of course, nobody argued with Kennedy's decision. That turned out to be a mistake. Group members tend to be alike in age, sex, beliefs, race, ethnicity, and opinions. Why are they similar? They are attracted to and likely recruit similar members, similar others. The groups operate in ways that encourage similarity in the members. Homogeneous groups are more cohesive. Diverse groups perform better than homogeneous groups. To examine the relationship between a business's performance and its racial and gender diversity, Herring in 2009 conducted a correlational study of over 1,000 U.S. workplaces and found a positive association between both types of diversity with sales revenue and number of customers. These results seem to indicate a positive relationship between diversity and a business's bottom line. But as you know, because these data are only correlational, we cannot draw conclusions here regarding one variable causing another. So the more diverse the organization, the more successful it will potentially be, because they get input from different ideas rather than a homogeneous group where most of the input is the same. In 1961, James Stoner discovered that despite common knowledge that group behavior is more conservative than individual leadership, studies show that the opposite was true. Behind the anonymity of group decision, committees were more likely to try risky behavior. And this he referred to as the risky shift phenomenon. Groups committees tend to enhance pre-existing tendencies, strengthen the member's average tendency, rather than split within the group. And this is known as group polarization. This is one reason why hung juries are so rare. Deliberation tends to lead to group polarization. However, research also shows that people who hold strong opinions before deliberating maintain these opinions even stronger after deliberation. Group polarization is evident on college campuses, where different fraternities maintain select reputations that tend to attract and polarize their members, while independents are more likely to be less polarized and more liberal. Delinquency is more likely where there are like-minded youth, in fact, will increase at a greater level than the sum of its members. Terrorism does not spontaneously erupt, but is the result of like-minded people who evolve to violence. Groupthink is a kind of thinking in which maintaining group cohesiveness and solidarity is more important than considering the facts in a realistic manner. Groupthink is most likely to occur when the group is highly cohesive, isolated from contrary opinions, and ruled by a directive leader who makes his or her wishes known. While more authoritarian governments commonly participate in groupthink, occurrences in American history include Pearl Harbor, the Bay of Pigs invasion, which we will talk about, the Vietnam War, which we will talk about, and Watergate, which we will also talk about. We're not going to talk about Pearl Harbor. The Bay of Pigs was in 1961. I already explained to you what it was. The Cuban emigres thought that they could take over the Cuban government, that because they were richer and smarter and better looking than the people that were on Cuba at the time, they figured they could just walk right over them. And Kennedy agreed with them. This was in 1961, right after he first became president. Watergate, Nixon decided that he needed to know what the Democrats were doing, so he bugged the Democratic headquarters. They got caught, and then he tried to cover it up. And because of Watergate, Nixon had to resign. He wasn't impeached. He resigned before he was impeached. One symptom of groupthink is an illusion of invulnerability, causing group members to overestimate their group's might and right. The captain of the Titanic had once said God himself could not sink this ship. On April 14, 1912, while still on the ship's first voyage, the Titanic struck an iceberg and sank, and only 711 out of the 2,224 people on board survived. Another symptom is the unquestioned belief in the group's morality, which also leads to overestimation of power. During the Watergate cover-up, Nixon and his advisors had several opportunities to admit their collusion, but just kept trying to hide their deeds. Eventually, Nixon resigned, and 7 of his advisors went to prison because they broke into Democratic headquarters and bugged them. And these are 6 of the people that went to prison. The group tends to discount challenges by collectively rationalizing their decisions. When talking about escalating the Vietnam War, President Johnson held weekly Tuesday lunches discussing the war. Rather than talking about why, the meeting was mostly used to justify and explain the war. The Tuesday meetings turned into rationalization sessions for the Johnson administration. And that's part of groupthink. The groups tend to stereotype their opponents as weak and unintelligent and incapable of legitimate retaliation. The Cuban immigrants who led the Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961 convinced JFK, John F. Kennedy, that the Cuban military was weak and ill-equipped. They also argued that popular support in Cuba would be so great that there would be a general uprising. The invasion, of course, collapsed in 2 days. There was no general uprising, and the Cuban military easily defeated the Bay of Pigs Cuban immigrants. Pressure toward uniformity, conformity pressures within the group by using ridicule and not allowing argument. Self-censorship is practiced by the members to prevent ridicule. During the preparation for the Challenger flight, Thiokol engineer George McDonald wanted to postpone the flight, but instead of clearly stating, "I recommend we don't launch below 53 degrees, he offered an unequivocal opinion. He suggested that lower temperatures are in the direction of badness for both O-rings. What did he think that they should do? From his tempered words, it's hard to tell. And of course, the Challenger blew up. This is in the early 1980s, 1984, 1985, and everybody on board died. Because there is little opposition within the group, there is an illusion of unanimity. The group tends to protect group from information that would call into question the effectiveness of morality or their decisions, and these are known as mind guards. The conservative right has several mouthpieces that defended every action taken by the Republican administration in general and George W. Bush in particular. Fox News, Patrick Buchanan, and Rush Limbaugh, not to mention Tucker Carlson. And they also, of course, supported Trump. Buchanan and Limbaugh have since died, but Tucker is still right there. A wise leader can take several steps to avoid groupthink: remain impartial, seek outside opinions, create subgroups, seek anonymous opinions. A study by L.H. Chin in 2000 showed that death rates nearly doubled for 16, 17-year-old drivers when they had 2 passengers rather than none. Were they more willing to take chances when others were egging them on and there was someone to show off for? And the answer is, yeah, these are new drivers and not very experienced people. Fortunately, President Kennedy learned from his mistakes with the Bay of Pigs decision, and when he encountered his next major foreign policy decision, the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1963, he took many of these steps to avoid groupthink. When his advisors met to decide what to do about the discovery of Soviet missiles in Cuba, Kennedy often absented himself from the group so as not to inhibit discussion. Kennedy brought in outside experts such as Adlai A. Stevenson, who were not members of the in-group. Adlai A. Stevenson had run for president against Eisenhower in 52 and 56. That Kennedy successfully negotiated the removal of Soviet missiles was almost certainly due to the improved methods of group decision-making he adopted. And that is the end of the chapter. So I will talk to you again next week. I don't know what, I can't remember. Wait a second. Next week. Oh, you have a paper due. I think I told you that. Chapter 9. I think it's next week. Chapter 9 is interpersonal attractions and close relationships. Ooh, we're going to talk about romance. Ooh.